Okay, so the question that I'm going to be addressing today is question one, which is in the film for the Social Rules Project, the character is fearful of how rules restrict her, but ultimately concludes that social rules are necessary for human freedom. Do you agree? What are the implications for the size and role of the government in contemporary societies? So, what I'm going to kind of do here is walk through what the character kind of did and what her arguments were, and then talk about if I align with them and how I align with them. But first and foremost, I think it's important for me to lay out that I agree with what the narrator is saying. So the character argues that rules can make you feel like you're in a loop, and she looks at sidewalks and urban planning as an example of that. When I say sidewalks, I mean that she said that hundreds of years ago someone drew a line, and now that's the same line that we walk in every day. That's not an exact quote, but it's a general synopsis of what she was trying to hint at. She also talks about other city codes, laws, policies. She talks about the distance between trees and all these things as maybe being unnecessary. Then, as the author goes further along her journey, she realizes that rules could actually be used to protect the land and to enforce environment sort of restrictions. She also talks about things like freedom of speech. Briefly, she hinted at that and talked about that as essential and rules that are actually used to help people. So those are just kind of general things that she said. I argue that without rules, society would be a total mess. That even though we have certain rules that could feel binding and could drag people down, that rules can help us with things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. It can make you feel more free than you already were. In addition, I would say that rules could help the environment in ways that lack thereof would not be able to. So thinking about things like placing fracking limits, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, trying to make sure that oceans stay clean as well as drinking water. We don't want that to be contaminated. Limits on fishing or on overgrazing, as we saw in the readings the past couple of days. Now, the second part of this question is about the implications for the size and role of government in contemporary societies. So, this this whole rule of making rules and the process that the narrator kind of talks it through with indicates a necessity for the government to make laws, which implies government action and a larger government. So the narrator argues that governments make laws, but need people to form coalitions and that laws reflect the will of the people. You see this when she goes around trying to get into groups when the stream dried up and she was trying to figure out how to get this corrupt mayor and overthrow the mayor, um, get the corrupt mayor out. And so you know she argues that in addition to the coalitions, government kind of needs to be large, not exactly in terms of government officials, but in terms of people acting as government agents. So forming interest groups that can help you combat things like climate change. That is all part of the government. So making it large, inclusive, so that more rules and more effective rules can be passed. Now, I think that the more action the government takes in creating rules, the less we'll actually need a large government. So, what I mean by that is that if the government banned fracking, put caps on greenhouse gas emissions, and did other things that were necessary in combating climate change, and created a sustainable environment, then there would be less of a need for people to create coalitions and to get involved in government, and then we could have a smaller government that doesn't infringe on, individual freedoms, individual rights, but that still takes things like, the environment and climate change very seriously. So I think that's kind of a happy medium between, getting rules passed and action done, but not making the government too large and not requiring the work of too many people all at once. Um, and then I also think that would then lead to governments being able to take a step back, and then everyone would be happy. So the implication is that a large government with heavy action is necessary in order to create rules and to make more rules. That's at least what the Social Rules Project implies. But I don't think that that necessarily needs to be accomplished, and that you can accomplish the same goal with maybe less involvement. So, just to build off what I was saying before, an alternative position that someone could take to my argument would be that a large government is necessary, um, uncircumstantially, to limit all these different rules and to create rules that are more favorable for the environment. And a reasonable person can make that argument by saying, if we collapse the big government, then we're consolidating the power into the hands of few, and then those few will then redistribute power, at least specifically in the United States, to the states, which will then not necessarily abide by the original federal regulations that we were talking about before, or the rules in this case. So that would be an argument somebody else makes. I would argue that that's wrong because as long as we elect the responsible people and we, keep these laws difficult to overturn, then it would be totally fine to later shrink the government a little bit to help satisfy other needs.